Chapter 6. Marian tried to remain calm as the rhinos escorted her through the castle hallways in the direction of her chambers. But inside, her mind was whirling and her heart was aching. In one day, she'd learned that her uncle was dead, his subjects were suffering, and there was a sulky child on the throne of England being controlled by a manipulative snake. And her dream position no longer existed. She tried to tell herself the King's Council should be the least of her concerns. After all, it was nothing compared to what happened to her uncle. But she couldn't help being disappointed by the turn of events. All she'd wanted her entire life was to be on the King's Council, to help others, to bring about change. What did they expect her to do now? Just sit back and sew and gossip with the ladies of the court? Worry only about what dress she should wear to this feast or that ball, while the rest of the kingdom fell apart all around her? No, she couldn't do that. That wasn't who she was. Not even close. So this Sir Hiss character, she remarked to her guards, trying to keep her tone casual. How long has he been serving as advisor to His Majesty? Joffrey shrugged his massive shoulders. Seems like forever, he said. He showed up right after Richard left for the war. He and the prince have been inseparable ever since. Of course, Marian thought, a bitter taste in her mouth. Sir Hiss probably saw a lonely, scared lion being forced by his big brother to take power. How lucky for John that Hiss was about to slip right into his world and help him fight his battles. Is that when the King's Council was disbanded? She pressed. Then she added, You do remember the council, don't you? The group of nobles who used to advise the king on important matters? Joffrey pulled out his chest. Of course I do. My father served as personal guard while they were in session. Then Hiss came along and he was suddenly let go. With no warning whatsoever. He told me... He broke off abruptly, yelping as Gerald, the other guard, stomped hard on his foot. What did you do that for? He demanded. Gerald sniffed, horn in the air. We have been tasked by His Majesty to escort the Lady Marian to her chambers, he reminded Joffrey, not to engage in idle gossip with our betters. Joffrey hung his head. Sorry, he muttered. Oh, don't mind me, Marian said, forcing an airy laugh. I'm just trying to make conversation, she paused, then added, So no one knows where Sir Hiss came from? Is he even English? Joffrey opened his mouth to answer, but one look from Gerald had him close it again. Marian sighed. She wasn't going to get anything more out of them, it seemed. Finally, he reached the top of a set of stone stairs that dead-ended on a small platform with a heavy wooden door, the door to her childhood chambers. She'd recognized it anywhere. Joffrey opened the door and stepped aside, allowing Marian to enter. Once inside, she twirled around, taking in her surroundings. While much of the castle had changed in her absence, her rooms looked exactly the same. The same giant stone fireplace on the far wall that would produce a roaring blaze. The same four-poster canopy bed with its thick brown curtains and the same lead glass windows that looked out over the late Queen Mother's gardens. She walked over to the windows now, peering outside, remembering the last time she had stood in those gardens, under the light of the moon, saying goodbye to her best friend. Oh, Robin, she thought, do you have any idea what you've come home to? Ah, now there's a sight for sore eyes. Marian whirled around, her own eyes bulging as they fell open, the stout white chicken stepping out of the next room, a huge smile on her face. Lady Cluck, she whispered. Is that really you? In the feathers, Lady Cluck declared, shaking the feathers in question. Though I should be asking you the same thing. You were such a skinny little kit when you left the castle. Now look at you, a grand lady. She brought a powdered blue handkerchief to her eyes, dabbing them. I can hardly believe it. Marian felt her cheeks heat in a blush. She smiled at her former nursemaid, who had practically raised her from the day she'd come to the castle after her parents had been killed. Kind and strict and fiercely protective, Lady Cluck had been like a mother to her growing up. And to see her again? Well, Finally, Marion began to feel as if she was home. She ran over to the chicken, throwing her arms around her and squeezing her tight. Cluck clucked awkwardly as if surprised by the sudden gesture of affection, but then wrapped her wings around Marion, giving her a warm hug. "It's good to see you again, dearie," she said. "I can't wait to hear all about your adventures." She pulled away. "But first, I've had the servants draw up a hot bath with rose petals and lavender to soothe you from your long journey." "That sounds heavenly," Marion admitted. "Thank you." Her attendant turned to the rhinos, who were still standing in the room awkwardly, as if they weren't sure what to do next. Cluck crossed her wings over her chest and shuffled the rhinos towards the exit. "Thank you for escorting me, my lady, safely," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You may leave us now. I can take it from here." Marion watched in amusement as her diminutive nursemaid practically shoved the massive rhinos out the door, then shut it firmly behind them. She knew they would likely stop just outside to stand guard as they'd been ordered to do by Sir Hiss, but at least she wouldn't have to look at them doing it. "So," Lady Cluck declared, interrupting Marion's thoughts as she walked over and placed a wing on her shoulder, turning her around. She studied the fox with careful eyes. "Are you all right? I have to assume you've heard the terrible news about Richard. I'm sure that came as a shock." Marion nodded, feeling the tears well in her eyes all over again. She angrily tried to swipe them away with her sleeve, but Cluck reached over, taking her paw in her wing and squeezing it gently. "Let it out, dearie," she soothed. "It's all right to cry. I've certainly shed my share of tears these last few weeks." So Marion sank down onto the bed and let the tears fall, allowed the sobs to escape her throat, choking out the grief and anger and frustration that had been knotted up inside of her since she'd gotten off the ship on English shores. And through it all, Cluck sat beside her, not speaking, just holding her paw. When she had finished, Marion rose to her feet. She walked to the window and stared outside. "Oh, Cluck, I was so happy to be coming home, but it's all become a nightmare. My uncle is dead. They've abolished the council. The animals are suffering in the towns, and Prince John seems more concerned with feasts and tournaments than with helping them." She turned back to her nursemaid. "And don't get me started on that advisor of his." "Sir Hiss?" Cluck made a face. "He's a piece of work, that one. I don't know what Prince John sees in him." Marion closed her eyes, feeling defeated. "Oh, Cluck, what am I to do?" Now, Cluck scolded, rising from the bed. "You mustn't despair. It's bad for your complexion. Why don't you just take your bath and have a long nap? Things are bound to get brighter once you've well rested." Marion glanced over at her nursemaid, suddenly uneasy. Could she trust her? She hadn't seen her in 3 years. What had she been doing this whole time at the castle? What if she'd pledged her allegiance to Prince John? What if he'd placed her as Marion's new lady-in-waiting as a spy, reporting back to him or Sir Hiss? Misery rose inside her. Was there anyone she could trust? She looked out the window again, down at the Queen Mother's apple tree. "Robin," she whispered. "I can trust Robin." "What was that, dearie?" Cluck asked, coming over to her side. "Nothing," she said quickly. She turned away from the window. "Please show me to my bath. And then there's something I need to do."